Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, House Bill 1293 comes to us amending Chapter 42, adding a new section into the Century Code, which is the Labor and Employment section. Part 1 of the bill, which would be the new section 34.062.01, is the definitions. These definitions are existing elsewhere in statute, but just for clarification in the chapter. Part 2 of this bill requires an equals pay certificate for any public contracts that we enter into. Subsection 1 states that the state may not execute a contract or agreement in excess of $500,000 with a business that on any single day during the last 12 years had 40 or more employees in the state or the state as primary place of business unless the business has an equal pay certificate. So what this bill does and what the section does is it places a new requirement of having an equal pay certificate on file with the Department of Labor. Section 3 goes into or subsection 3 goes into the details of the equal pay certificate themselves and how a business qualifies. And it allows the collection of a $150 filing fee in order to receive a certificate with the Department of Labor. And the Department of Labor Commissioner will issue a certificate if the business meets a number of requirements that are all existing federal law. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of '64, Equal Pay Act of '63, for example. And so, then as we move down, goes into the clarification about the issuance and rejections of certificate, revocation of certificate, and then revocation of the contract. If the business is found to be in violation of this section, the Labor Commissioner would be able to revoke any state contract that was issued for any project across the state. Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, your Industry, Business, and Labor Committee, with an 11-4 vote, decided that this is not pertinent legislation that needed to be assessed, primarily because of the fact that all the bill does is tell businesses to certify with the Labor Commissioner that they're following the law. As long as they're following the law, they're good to go. We felt that having to have a separate certificate where it just says, yep, we're following the law, we're good, was an additional step that was unnecessary. We had representatives from the Office of Management and Budget that came in saying their certification process and the registration process would create significant time delays, significant costs, that the Office of Management and Budget doesn't actually regulate all contracts, so somebody's going to have to do some grunt work to make sure that every agency is following through with this so that they can actually look into it. Similarly, they also say that OMB and the Attorney General's office already includes compliance language to the law within their contracts, so this would be an unnecessary duplicative step. Additionally, the Labor Commissioner came in and said that this is going to create some significant hardship for maintaining compliance, and it's not something that their office is equipped to do. But more importantly, he had concerns over the fact that he now is in charge of the power to revoke any state contract. And when we asked him as the committee about if there is an issue with compliance, which then that business would be in violation of the law and could have prosecution brought onto them elsewhere. But if there is an issue where they are no longer in compliance with this, who would have that power, or who could feasibly have that power within state government? And we couldn't come up with anyone that would be able to unilaterally have the power to revoke state contracts all across the board. That seems like a power that no one individual should have, and that's a power that would be created under this bill. So because of that, the Industry, Business, and Labor Committee voted 11-4, do not pass, and we ask the Assembly to concur. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any discussion? Representative M. Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. Testimony was from OMB that yes, indeed, they have in their contracts a clause that says that the employer does not discriminate, and that they have suggested model contracts for other agencies that also has that language in every single contract. The problem is, then I asked, well, are you aware of anyone ever being fined in any way or suffering anything on account of this? And the answer was no. And as we went on further, we found out that basically that's because they make absolutely no effort whatsoever to see if a company complies. I asked the Labor Commissioner if when someone was found guilty of equal wage or human rights violations, if that fact was reported to other agencies, and the answer was no. I asked if other agencies checked with the Labor Commissioner if their contractors ever had committed these offenses, and the answer was no. At least by putting this on larger contracts under the Labor Commissioner, there would be someone who would know when a contractor had these violations and could take steps. Now, could argue indeed that the revocation clause is not in the proper form at this time. But I would ask that you keep this alive and move it on to the Senate, and let's actually have some teeth in the contracts that these contractors agree to abide by when we're spending all this tax money. Let's protect the people of North Dakota. Let's have these agencies talk to each other. Let's get the Labor Commissioner actually involved in protecting people. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Wolverton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. And thank you to Representative Beadle for walking through the bill, and to Representative Nelson for explaining some of the issues that we drew out during the hearing on this bill. And I would agree that there was some issues with the way the bill was written, but I don't think they were problems that we couldn't have reworked. The way it is right now, our equal pay laws, this year actually is the 50th anniversary of equal pay in North Dakota. So for 50 years, the state of North Dakota has recognized that there is harmful impacts of unequal pay for men and women in the state. And we've had a law on the books, but even with that law and the way it's been carried out, we haven't equalized pay for men and women in the state of North Dakota or anywhere in the country. And in fact, North Dakota, with the wage gap that we do have, both in the one that accounts for education and experience and the one that doesn't, we're one of the states with a larger wage gap. So, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, this bill was intended to create one more tool for our state to enforce existing laws. Laws on the books don't mean much if they're not correcting problems and if they're not being enforced. And that's exactly what we heard from the Office of Management and Budget, is that they have a little checkbox on their contracts and their procurement forms asking businesses if they comply with the law, asking them to certify that, but they never once checked into it, and there's no enforcement that takes place. So continuing this conversation and reworking the bill provides an opportunity for our state to ensure that all citizens are paid equally for their work. So, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, I would ask for a green vote. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Casper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. Think about what this bill does. It tells the business community, the contractors, that you're guilty until you prove you're innocent. And this bill says you have to prove you're innocent. You have to prove you're following the law. Now, I, for one, think that the business community across the state of North Dakota, and really across the nation for most part, attempts to follow the law. Think the message we're going to send to out-of-state companies and in-state companies that we're saying to them, you're guilty, prove you're innocent. I'd much rather have it the way it is. We have laws on the books. The contracts stipulate there's federal legislation that requires that you cannot discriminate and that you follow the laws of the state and the laws of the United States. Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, this is a bad bill.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Kaiser.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, I want to take this opportunity to actually thank Representative Wolverton for bringing forward actually three bills on this very important subject. Representative Becker, during our hearing on one of those bills, made a very, I think, short but important comment. If there is prejudice in this state relative to pay, we want to recognize it and we want to correct it. This is not a partisan issue. This is an issue that, as a state and the state body responsible for policy development, is required to consider. We do have other bills, and I don't want to use the old excuse, well, we got other bills that are going to look at this, but this bill would change the nature of our Labor Department and the approach we have historically taken. And the question is that the policy we really want? The Labor Department does set up systems of attempting to collect data and information relative to what's going on in the state. They operate primarily on a complaint basis. I have to say, being a business owner that has had a complaint, not relative to wages, but a different complaint filed against us I've had firsthand experience with the Labor Department, and I have to share with you they are very intensive, comprehensive, and fair in their deliberation. It is not a simple process of making a phone call and asking a question. If you are a business that has ever been involved in this process, you will be releasing every relevant record that you have, and if you don't want to release it, they'll subpoena it. They will get it. So the companies participate in a willing manner generally on this. If there is some kind of problem, they address it. But one of the points they made, and our state contracts also make, is that if a violation of any form, any labor violation is identified, the business entity is notified and given corrective action and given an opportunity to take corrective action. In the state of North Dakota, we have had contracts where there have been reported complaints, where there have been investigations, and in fact, where there has been, for whatever reason, a violation. The Labor Department has monitored the case and the corrections have been made. This sets up a process where companies will have to pay $150, and as you heard, they're going to have to just fill out a form saying, yep, I comply. But the reality is nothing will happen until a complaint is filed, and that initiates all of the other processes. The committee did listen to all of the arguments on this case. I have never, in my legislative experience, seen OMB come in and more strongly testify in opposition to any legislation because of the impact it would have on all the contracts. Keep in mind, OMB has regulatory authority over the executive branch, not the other branches of government, and this would become very difficult. We would have to set up or change the law to give, well, we are, with this bill, giving the Labor Department, in a sense, the authority to regulate all contracts across all three divisions, even though it's an executive branch. So, members of the Assembly, we strongly encourage you to support the recommendation of the committee and give this bill a do not pass.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the House has before it for final consideration House Bill 1293. The clerk will open the key and you may record your vote. Has every member voted? Representative Schneider, Thorson, Mitskog, Hawken, Belter, Franzvog. The key will be closed and the clerk will take the record. Final vote shows 22 yea, 67 nay, 5 absent, not voting. House Bill 1293 is declared failed. Continuing on 11th.